We're joined right now on RealAgriculture.com by Len Cody. He's with the Conference Board of Canada. Welcome today, Len.
Good morning.
Len, the Conference Board of Canada has put out a study on the ethanol industry, and it's definitely got a lot of interesting things, from everything from production to environment to kind of the effect on corn acres. I guess, quickly, in summary, what is your feeling on the ethanol industry in Canada?
Well, we were asked to investigate questions like, is it green? Is it putting pressure on acreage planted and harvested? Is it ethanol in Canada contributing to the food versus fuel challenge? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? And so we investigated those issues carefully and found that ethanol is generally a very useful transportation in fuel in Canada and contributes to the economy.
So what impact does it have? Obviously, it's, one would think that it's good for corn growers. What about the rest of agriculture? One of the things we hear right away is that it's not good for the livestock industry and it's driving feed prices higher. What did some of your research show there?
Yeah. Now, are we talking about just in Canada? Because the work that we reviewed was specific to Ontario and corn.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Yeah. And what we found were a couple of studies from the 2009 era that looked at a brief period in 2007 as the push-off point, and they chose a period where crude oil prices were rising rapidly, hence diesel prices, one of the key operating costs for a farm, were rising rapidly. They assumed that corn exports/imports to Canada fell to zero, and they then measured the impact of rising production of corn-based ethanol and came to some results in terms of the impact ethanol is having. And when we looked at that, there just wasn't any way to separate the impact of the assumption on corn trade or separate the impact of the assumption on oil prices. And so we weren't able to actually determine the financial impact that ethanol demand for corn has on farmers. Clearly, corn prices go up, and clearly that has an impact on feed prices. Just as clearly, the byproduct, the DDGS byproduct from ethanol production, has an impact on feed prices and feed markets as well.
Okay, so your research showed that there was little or inconclusive impact or no impact?
The impact that was identified in the studies we reviewed was significant, but what we had trouble with was clearly identifying the causality between ethanol demand for corn and the impacts, because there were other factors that were included in the studies, and the three main causes that I mentioned weren't clearly separated.
One of the things that we've had Kevin Greer from the George Morris Center, we've talked to him a couple times about the ethanol industry, and one of the things that Kevin always says is that this industry does not survive without government subsidy. I know you did some policy work in this study. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I think that the answer to that question is mostly about timing. It is a reality that the government support of the ethanol sector is a fraction of what it used to be. The support today is a fraction of what it was 5 to 10 years ago, and within the next 5 years it will be gone. We have almost 2 billion liters a year of ethanol production capacity in Canada, and we didn't see any signs that capacity is uneconomic or would cease to produce without the government support. So at one time it may have been true that the industry relied heavily on government, but today I don't think that's the case.
Right. So do you see the ethanol policy, changing then, and evolving, and where it can eventually fully survive on its own?
I think we're almost there. The federal government certainly has put a time limit on the The only subsidy or the only contribution they make now is the operating cost payment, the support payment, and that will be gone within the next 5 years.
Okay. So in your opinion, then, from doing the analysis here on this industry, obviously in the mainstream media, there's a lot of talk about food versus fuel, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Do you think we can do both?
I think that there's a complicated answer to that question, but I'll put it in two parts. When we looked at North America in particular, and it's a very different answer for Europe than it is for North America because population density is very different, because the biofuel they're looking at is biodiesel, not ethanol, and because farming practices are so different and farm production is so different there than it is here. Within North America, for both Canada and U.S., we looked at areas that are harvested by crop and tried to correlate the area harvested for corn and for wheat in Western Canada against biofuels demand for ethanol production. And we couldn't find any evidence that there's been a significant increase in area harvested as a result of biofuel demands. The reason that biofuel demand for corn and wheat has been able to rise rapidly, and this is more for corn than wheat, but the reason it's been able to rise rapidly without putting pressure on land is that corn yields have been steadily improving. And so to the extent that the demand for corn to produce ethanol continues to grow at a rate that's consistent with or enabled by the improvements in yield and farm practices, yes, we can do both. We can do both.
Okay.
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the second part of that question is the ethanol sector, both in the U.S. and Canada, really is looking to next generation technologies, which would broaden the feedstocks available to more than just grains. And that's where certainly the U.S. government is expecting and planning for the next increment of ethanol supply to come from. And Canada is one of the world leaders in development of cellulosic technologies. To the extent that those technologies become commercial, then we have an opportunity to continue a growth path, a significant growth path, without creating pressure on food use of grains.
And in Canada, what are those possible commercial cellulosic crops?
We have, really there are a couple of paths. We have a demonstration cellulosic ethanol plant in Ottawa, operated by Iogen, and that's been going for a few years now. We have a demonstration early commercial kind of plant that Enerchem is building in Edmonton that will use the inorganic waste from a landfill. And we have a great deal of research across the country, but a fair bit of it focused in BC on using forest waste as the source, as the feedstock for ethanol production.
So as we move closer to the commercialization of some of those cellulosic crops, isn't that where kind of the corn lobby, like the GFO, or in the U.S. The corn growers, that's where we're going to kind of have some sort of intersection here, and a bit of almost like we see the battle between canola oil versus soybean oil, as far as what is the better way to go? Our research, historically, ethanol has been a gasoline extender in Canada in particular, but also in the U.S. It's only Brazil where you have seen ethanol take a major share of the market for transportation fuels and become a primary transport fuel. There are a lot of steps between where we are now and where we would actually see competition between oil or gasoline and ethanol as independent and separate transportation fuels. Our research didn't conclude that we're headed that direction in the near future in Canada. Okay, Len. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime in the future.
My pleasure.